Hello everyone, this is Professor Hasselman. This is History 105, and today we're going to be beginning our discussion of the Industrial Revolution. Now, last week we talked about the development of the French Revolution and the development of political revolutions in France and the development of rebalance of power after Napoleon's era. So this is kind of one of the layers that's occurring during this time period. So Europe was the first continent and Britain the first country to industrialize. Europe got there first because of its abundance of natural resources and an agricultural revolution that led to a growing population and its corollaries, high demand for manufactured goods, and a potentially larger labor force. Now, Britain was the first European nation to exploit these advantages because the commercial and financial revolutions had endowed it with an abundance of investment capital. Now, because its government took a hands-off, laissez-faire attitude to the economy, and because it was the least hierarchical and most open to merit and new ideas of any of the great nations of Europe. Now, these conditions produced a host of brilliant inventors, financiers, and managers who made the first industrial revolution happen. Now, demand for cheap textiles, especially cotton, resulted in developments in other fields, from mechanical engineering and metallurgy to transportation and marketing. So, why did the Industrial Revolution, happen first in Europe, in Britain in particular, followed by Belgium, France, the Ruhr Valley, and northern Italy? And why the late 18th and 19th centuries? Now, there were four European preconditions to industrialization. First, Europe was blessed with the first requirement for industrialization: the raw materials out of which to make things and the fuel to power the manufacturing process. Now, during the 18th century, Europe experienced a population explosion that was in part a result of long-term and ongoing agricultural revolution, leading to an increased food supply. Now, the population increase led to increased demand for manufactured goods, and the increase in population also led to an enlarged labor force. That is, the workers needed to produce these articles. Now, all throughout Europe, and especially in the West, this new itinerant labor force, spawned by the agricultural revolution of the 13th to the 18th centuries, and the population explosion of the 18th century, was available to work on the raw materials of Europe to supply their own demand. So why did they do so first in Great Britain? Now, there were four additional preconditions specific to Britain, as opposed to this four specific preconditions for all of Europe, that helped it to become the first industrial nation. Now, thanks to the commercial and financial revolutions, the British had plenty of capital and methods to raise funds to build factories. The British government had a laissez-faire economic policy that prevented obstacles to investment, entrepreneurship, and creativity. British culture, perhaps along with the Dutch, had the greatest perception of social mobility, and British merchants and financiers played a larger role and garnered greater respect than anywhere else in Europe. Now, perhaps because of the previous three conditions, late 18th century and early 19th century Britain produced a great number of innovators. Now, as with the space program in the 20th century, developments in one area tended to spur or require advancement in another, and the end result was an industrialized nation. Now, for the purposes of this lecture, the key to unlocking the Industrial Revolution is cotton. In the mid-18th century, cotton was both highly desirable and difficult to produce. Cotton was grown abroad, first in the North American colonies, then in the United States or the West Indies. By 1750, the supply of raw cotton from the colonies was more than adequate, thanks to the plantation slave economy of the South. Now, the process of producing cotton, though, made it rare and expensive. First, the cotton was separated from its own seeds, then hand-carded and combed. Then it was spun into thread on spinning wheels, and finally it was woven by hand on slow, heavy looms that required two people to work. As a result, cotton manufacture was a cottage industry. Raw cotton fibers were distributed to cotton factors or agents to farmers' wives who did the work described above or described already. Their products were then collected periodically by the factor. As a result, cotton was expensive, costing 11 shillings per pound. Now in 1733, John Kay invented the flying shuttle, a lighter, quicker loom able to be worked by one hand. In 1763, James Hargreaves invented the spinning jenny, a multiple spinning wheel on a rectangular frame with 8 or 10 or more spindles, all of which could be worked by one person. In 1769, Richard Arkwright invented the water frame, also known as the throstle or roll drawing machine, which strengthened the thread by twisting it before it entered the spinning jenny. In 1793, Eli Whitney, or possibly Mrs. Whitney, invented the cotton gin, which efficiently separated the seeds from the raw cotton. By 1800, the real limit on cotton manufacture was energy, the number of spinning jenny spools that could be cranked by a single human being. After the 1760s, it became common to assemble groups of spinning jennies, water frames, and flying shuttles in factories, where they were powered by water wheels. Now, this limited factory locations to places with rushing rivers, often inconvenient for large financial and commercial centers such as London. Further, the rivers might freeze in winter or dry up in summer. Now, the answer to these problems was steam. In 1712, Thomas Newcomen applied for a patent for an efficient or inefficient atmospheric engine to power water pumps for coal mines. In 1769, James Watt modified Newcomen's engine to make it far more efficient and capable of providing circular motion, perfect for powering spinning jennies, flying shuttles, and mules. Now, beginning in 1785, textile manufacturers began to apply steam engines to powering machinery much larger and more extensive than possible with the human hand. And they could now erect their factories closer to sources of raw materials, labor, and markets. The only limitation on the size of the factory and the number of machines that could be powered from a steam engine was how much steam pressure could be generated. Now, that was limited by the strengths of the metals that made up a steam engine. Now, to prevent boiler explosions, it was necessary to produce stronger metals. Metal before 1800 meant iron and smelt iron. Charcoal, which comes from burnt wood, was also needed. Now, unfortunately, as early as 1700, Britain was running out of trees. In 1709, Abraham Darby figured out how to preheat coal, which becomes coke, to separate iron from its ore. The iron would then be wrought, that is, pounded flat with hammers manually. However, this resultant iron of varying thicknesses is still quite weak. In 1783, Henry Cort invented puddling and rolling using coal to heat iron ore till molten, which allowed it to be cast into molds. Now, this process produced stronger, more homogeneous iron. And it also made it easier to prefabricate materials. In 1856, Henry Bessemer figured out that preheated iron and carbon-produced high-grade steel, much stronger and more flexible than iron. Now, all of these inventions and processes worked together. Better metals meant better tools, stronger, cheaper cutlery, rails for railroads, and better steam engines. Better steam engines meant railways and steamships by the 1820s, more powerful pumps to allow for deeper mines, which led to more coal, tin, and iron ore, and increasingly powerful motive power to turn spinning jennies, water frames, and flying shuttles in ever larger factories. Factories rendered cottage industry, piecework, and handwork no longer profitable. And increasingly, in textile and other industries, manufacturing was organized in factories in big towns, powered by steam engines, supplied by coal from the mines in the North Midlands, Wales, and Scotland, and supplied with labor from the countryside, and able to bring goods to the whole world via steamships and railways. Now, the greatest entrepreneurs, such as Sir Josiah Wedgwood, sought to control every aspect of production from quarries and canals for raw materials to showrooms and shops in major cities. Now, what were the results of all this activity? Well, it varied according to one's perspective. On a global level, Britain became manufacturer to the world and increased its lead as the wealthiest country on earth. The factory owner made fabulous profits. By 1820, one spinner, for example, was able to do the work of 20 spinners before industrialization. The consumer had access to lots of cheap goods. Cotton, for example, went from 11 shillings a pound in 1784 to 1 shilling a pound by 1832. The profitability of American slavery also increased, especially after Britain outlawed slavery in its own colonies, and so helped cause the American Civil War. The lower price of cotton also enhanced the profitability of American slavery. Similar results, without the last implication, were produced in all sorts of industries. The former agricultural workers who drifted to the cities in search of work experienced hell on earth.